Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our final video of 2020. It's been a long, strange ride that we began on January 1st, and for a long time we were consistent every day with a video. Near the end, we kind of got a little more sporadic, but I figured on the last day of the year I would end how I began this year. And I'm going to do a video now about some of the books I've read this year. More specifically, books I've listened to. I know there's a long running debate whether an audiobook is comparable to reading a book. In my opinion, they're the same. An unabridged audiobook is a reading of the written word for word. And I thought I would share some of my favorite books of the year that I've completed on Audible. And by the way, Audible's not paying me anything. I actually pay Audible each month for a membership. But if you don't have Audible, go give it a try. Honestly, it's a great service. And my favorite book of the year that I've read so far and completed is His Very Best by Jonathan Alter. It is the first full length biography of Jimmy Carter. And it tracks Carter's life from his boyhood through his naval years to governor of Georgia to the presidency and post presidency. It's a really wonderful book and captures the essence of a man who, as the author says, has lived in 3 centuries of American life. Another great book, probably my second favorite book, is Hoax by Brian Stelter of CNN. And this really goes into how Fox News works and the narrative behind a lot of things that you see on Fox bubble up through the right wing media ecosystem. I think it's one of the first real good, thorough examinations of Fox since Al Franken's Lies and Lying Liars in 2003. And Selter is an expert on cable news. He started a blog on cable news and while he was still in high school. So he's a longtime observer of cable news, has his own show now on CNN and works for the network, obviously, and has a wonderful newsletter, but just a really fascinating look at the right wing media ecosystem. Another book is Rage by Washington Post award winning editor and columnist Bob Woodward. Of course, he came to fame with the Watergate scenario, and for some reason, every president since Nixon has sat down for recorded interviews with Bob Woodward, and he has written wonderful books on their administration. He has written 2 so far on the Trump era, and is working with Robert Costa now on a 3rd. But Rage really delves into Trump's response to COVID, impeachment, and the early Black Lives Matter movement in the country. It's really harrowing to read. The book came out in September, and you're reading about things that were happening in July, back in February, that Trump knew COVID was going to be bad, that he knew it was airborne, and you just read all of this stuff, and it's just a really damning indictment of his term in office. Another book that I read, and far and away, if you want to understand this year and what has happened with our response to COVID, the historic precedent for it, and cautionary tales, The Great Influenza by John Barry. And this is a book that's about 15 years old. George W. Bush actually read it in the summer of 2005 while he was in Texas, and when he came back to Washington, everybody in his national security team and at HHS and NIH, he told them, read this, develop plans for pandemic response. And really, if Trump had followed some of the recommendations of Bush's, what they came up with, the response to coronavirus would have been a lot better. Instead, we got what we're currently living in. Another great book was The Room Where It Happened by John Bolton. And The Room Where It Happens really focuses on John Bolton's time as National Security Advisor and also Trump's interactions with world leaders and how troubled Bolton was by some of this. Obviously, Bolton and Trump come from foreign policy in two radically different perspectives. But Bolton, in it, describes why he went to work for Trump and what he saw as his role. And obviously, since he's become an outspoken critic of Trump and did not want to see him reelected, but did not vote for Joe Biden. So it's one of those people that walks one of those tight ropes that, in my opinion, is kind of squishy, but a great book. Another great book is Burning Down the House, and it's by Julia Zelter, and he is a historian at Princeton. And this book examines how Newt Gingrich's takedown of Speaker Wright and Newt Gingrich's no-holds bar approach to politics led us to the current hellscape that we're in. There are many books that examine this, and this is beginning to become a very widely held view in political science and recent American history. A lot of academics are beginning to recognize the significance of the Gingrich style of politics, but his is a really fascinating look at that event that some people sometimes overlook. Too Much and Never Enough by Mary Trump, which is Donald Trump's niece, and paints a very unflattering picture of Donald Trump. And really, I think the conclusion that she comes to is that Trump is not to blame specifically himself for his erratic behavior. And she's a psychiatrist. She has a degree in psychology, a PhD. Her main premise is that it's Fred. It was his style of nurturing his children that led to Trump and the difficulties we find ourselves in. The Gatekeepers by Chris Whipple, which examines the relationships of White House chiefs of staff and the presidents they serve. I thought it was a very interesting book that examines what is possibly the most important role in the White House outside of the president himself, and very, very powerful role. They certainly do hold the keys to the throne and probably are the equivalent of an American prime minister. And last but not, I got two more. The Hardest Job in the World by John Dickerson of CBS. And in it, Dickerson makes an argument that the job of the presidency of the United States has become too hard. We expect too much. We put too much on their plate, and it's kind of designed for failure and overload. And he offers some reforms in it to make the presidency more manageable. And I really enjoyed this book for this reason. There's a lot of books and a lot of debate about how Congress is broken. And there's a lot of suggestions about how to fix it. And some of them are good suggestions. Some of them are very bad, in my opinion. And some of them focus on taking more power away from Article 1 and giving it to Article 2. This book makes the argument that is more rarely discussed is how to reform Article 2. And it is a very good book, I think, to read at the time I read it. I read it in August as the two conventions were coming up and we were getting ready to go into the home stretch of the election season. Obviously, I made up my mind who I was going to vote for in February. Long ago. But this book really puts into a context a lot of why reform was needed and opened my eyes to some things I hadn't considered before and raised issues that I thought might need to be addressed in the new administration and issues we'll talk about on here as the year goes on. But the first book that I started out the year with was A Very Stable Genius by Philip Rucker and Carol Leonnig. This book is a lot like other books that have been written by reporters who cover the Trump White House. Very insightful, full of fresh info and reporting, and really draws on the coverage they've already did. This is, as I said, by Rucker and Leonnig, who work for the Washington Post, are two of the best plugged-in reporters in all of Washington. And the title, A Very Stable Genius, of course, comes from that famous Trump quote where he said he was a very stable genius. And it tracks Trump's erratic behavior up through the midterm, right up to the midterms, after the midterms, and right up to when the dam began to break on impeachment. It obviously ends right there because they had to send it to press to get it out in January. But it's a really great book. I think that it's a book that probably now, as the Trump administration comes to a close, might be worth a revisit. I understand they're following up on that with reporting on COVID response, Black Lives Matter, the 2020 election, what we're living through right now, and the like. So those are my favorite books of the year. I'll see y'all all in 2021.